And then to cap it off, and we didn't know they were coming at all, but in came, and we think they were phantoms, and they came down to us from the north, and they had napalm, and that got dropped almost on our eye, and that finished the mining position. It was absolutely forbidden to go outside that defended position, because no matter how careful you are, particularly at night, you can go out between Jack there and Joe there, right? Coming back, lose track of just where you are, and you come back through Tom and Dick over there, and they shoot your head off. Turned around, I said to my Sergeant Major, I said, it's time to send the clearing patrols out. And he said, it is too. And I sent the order down the radio, send the clearing patrols out, and so help me God, 20 seconds later, off went the claymores, out went the rifles, and off went the M60 machine gun as well. And I thought to myself, God, they've shot out the clearers. I was born in 1935 in Newcastle.
Well, I understand that you arrived in Vietnam just after the Tet Offensive. What kind of briefing, or what did you know about the state of the Vietnam War before you left?
I can't really recall that we had much of a briefing at all. We certainly weren't gathered together to be told, you know, as a formal briefing. I don't recall anybody talking to us formally at Holsworthy. I mean, anybody who'd just come home from Vietnam to talk to us formally. I think we read a lot in the newspapers, saw a lot on television, but formal briefing, I'm not so sure that we got anything. I can recall that we knew that before we left that the second Tet Offensive had started, but only in a minor way, and about if my company was 120 strong, then probably about 20 of them, perhaps 30, went up with the advance party, and they were those 30 guys. They joined a company of the 7th Battalion for a few weeks. Our battalion was relieving the 7th, so my A company guys, they joined a company of 7 RAR for 2 or 3 weeks. Went out on operations with the 7th Battalion when they went out, and generally, you know, sort of 7th Battalion helped them sort of settle in, so that by the time I got there, I know I went up by Sydney. By the time I got there with the remainder of my troops, then they were all settled in, and my second in command was there waiting for me, and he had a briefing, so he brought me up to speed as soon as we arrived there. So that's how the changeover worked. It was good and smooth and well worth it. So, but we did miss out on any real form of briefing in Holsworthy before we left.
Well, I can understand that your family might have been sad to see you go again, but I'm wondering what your attitude was to the campaign in Vietnam and how much you wanted to go.
I had no personal view, but I was a regular soldier, and so you go where you're sent. And was I pleased to go? I was pleased to go, yeah, because I mean, there I was. I'd been in the army 15 years, and I'd been trained to do what I was going off to do. Simple as that.
And it sounds like you felt prepared and well equipped.
I was as well prepared and as well equipped, both physically and mentally, as I possibly could have been, without actually having seen action before. Mm. But I knew what to do. I mean, when we came back to Coral after the ambushes, then I knew exactly point by point by point what I had to do to ensure that my company position was going to be as safe and sound and secure as possible. There was, for example, a huge, because of the distance we were trying to cover, there was a huge gap on my left flank between my company and D Company on the left. And so I walked over to D Company, spoke to their company commander, a good friend of mine, and we went out to his right flank, and I said, look down there, and I used his radio, and I sent a message through saying, stand up and wave a hanky or something on my left flank. I had that all rigged. So they waved the flank, waved the hanky, and that was about a 300-yard gap. And I said, that's my extreme left-hand pit, and there's the gap between you and me. And I said, and if I get into trouble, I want you to have your machine guns on fixed lines to cover that gap between me and you, because I'll be too busy doing anything else. So we organised that, and then I went back to there were 8 armoured personnel carriers in behind me, and I then went back to them and I said, there's a gap there to there. I said, don't let anybody come through that if they come through it at all. And then I spoke to I spoke to my mortar sergeant, and he was the what we call a mortar fire controller, an MFC, and he was a sergeant, and he was attached to me away from the mortars, and he was talking to our mortars, and he'd give them directions. And I said to him, Sergeant, I said, see that gap there? Don't let them come through there. And he was registering targets already, even before I got around to talking to him. So he knew where the rounds would fall on certain, depending on where the occasion occurred. But the mortars already would have registered on those targets, so that all he had to say was fire target 1 or fire target 3 or whatever mumbo jumbo the mortar people use. So I went around, and all those things were up there. My checklist of what to do was up there. Mm. Mm.
Well, I'm wondering, can you tell us about the intelligence that you received?
Mm. Well, it was poor, and we were briefed constantly, and we were told that the Tet Offensive was over, that the NVA were leaving Saigon in droves, that they were typically tired, wet, cold and hungry, and they were just fleeing north. And the exec was the opposite. There was no indication at all that within 24 hours we were going to have a North Vietnamese regular regiment knocking on our front door. That statement by me is, it's held by everybody who was there, and it's reinforced by the fact that we arrived there late in the afternoon. Now, common sense tells you that, if you're going to be prepared for anything, then you've got to get there early enough to be prepared. And we weren't. We weren't prepared for anything. Not like that. We had no defence stores. There were no. I mean, we had the odd entrenching tool, but just like a little fold-up shovel thing. And I'd just like you to bear in mind that we were accustomed to, and we'd been training for counter-revolutionary warfare, which is heavy patrolling and sniping the odd angry shot at somebody who's running away. We certainly weren't prepared for 1,500 or 2,000 regular North Vietnamese, walking down the road at us. And so the best we had as far as preparation for our weapon pits was the typical Dixie and entrenching tool and things like that. That wasn't all that difficult because it was good, soft, sandy loam and fairly easy to dig in. If it had been harder, we'd have been in terrible trouble because there were no engineer supplies. We had no sandbags. We had no star pickets. We had no barbed wire, and it came in dribs and drabs, and there was never enough of that. I mean, when we finally got barbed wire, it comes in coils, and of course the smaller the quantity of wire you get, then the longer you've got to stretch it, and the longer you stretch it, the lower it becomes. So what we had, pardon me, was not very effective, and but effective enough to the extent that when battle was finally joined on the morning of the 16th of May, 2 o'clock in the morning, we had fire support just waiting to be used. I mean, the first indication we had that the North Vietnamese were there was 2 o'clock in the morning, when the sky was alight with their signal flares and their green tracer. The North Vietnamese used green tracer, we always used red. So we knew they were around. So the green tracer was coming in, the flares were going off, the sky was alight with the 207mm rockets, with the flares coming from behind the rocket propelled grenades. They had 12.5mm machine guns firing in, and they were on the wire within 2 minutes of all this starting, with Bangalore torpedoes and satchel charges blowing the wire right there in front of us. And it didn't take them very, very long for them to get a number of guys into our weapon pits. My platoon on the extreme left was Neil Weeks, and one of his sections was badly knocked around, and we had to withdraw them, and then Neil counter-attacked, and they were finished off there. But at the same time, and we weren't really aware of it, but while all this was going on, what we didn't know was that there was a Royal Australian Air Force pilot above Coral in a little Cessna. He was a forward air controller, and he was a Mirage pilot, and he called in. We think it was Phantoms, and there were 3 of them, and there were 3 armed helicopters, and there was Spooky, and Spooky's an old DC-3 loaded down with flares and Gatling guns, and they were just flying backwards and forwards across our tank, across our front, firing right along our wire, and finally we had our own guns, and they were firing in depth behind the NVA, and there was an American 8-inch battery at Tarn about 10 kilometres behind us, and they were firing. And on one occasion, and we don't know how it happened, but we didn't mind it, an 8-inch shell landed about 30 metres in front of our wire, blew a hole in the ground as big as this lounge room, scattered dirt from one end of the place to another, and the force of the explosion blew an M60 machine gun out of one of my gunner's hands. That was the force of the wind blast from that, and that hole was really big.
And why do you say, sorry for interrupting, why do you say you didn't mind the friendly fire?
Because it was just close enough. We didn't know it was coming. I mean, one would normally think that it would have landed a bit more than 30 metres from us, but it came at the right time anyhow, and we had no danger. We weren't in danger. No, the ground was too soft, and so the shell would have penetrated to some degree before it was soft sandy loam, and that shell would have penetrated to some degree before exploding. And so it just blew this big hole. I mean, if it had landed on a base of concrete, we'd have all been splintered by it. And then to cap it off, and we didn't know they were coming at all, but in came, and we think they were phantoms, and they came down to us from the north, and they had napalm, and that got dropped almost on our wire, and that finished the morning. Yeah, that finished it.
And do you think your company received any fallout from the napalm?
No, it was just out far enough. Just out far enough. They should have been coming along, running along our front. They didn't. They came towards us. And I mean, the only reason I knew they were there, because there were so many, everything in our vicinity was on fire. Well, I mean, we had tents on fire and bundles and there were ammunition boxes, and they were on fire, and the scrub was on fire, right? And I'm not sure whether I heard any noise, seeing them, to hear them coming. I don't know. I may have heard a noise but not known what it was, and I looked up, and there before me I saw the fires glinting on their belly tanks and under their wings, and as they sort of lifted off, and I saw those napalm canisters dropping. That's how close they were. And then they just went poof, exploded everywhere.
Well, it sounds like a very intense
It was.
action.
Yeah.
That you were in.
Lasted perhaps 3 hours, maybe a little longer. First light, 5:30, 6 o'clock. They came in at 2 o'clock. I think it was 2. Yeah, it was 2 o'clock when it started. So it could have been perhaps 5 o'clock when it finished. So 3 hours. Let's say 3 hours. Very intense period. Very, very intense. I mean, my company ran out of ammunition. We had a Land Rover come, one of the guys from behind us, he brought a Land Rover up full of ammunition while it was all going on. And that was unloaded, and then we carried it forward to the guys who needed it. And I mean, the main force came against me and spilt over to the left and spilt over to the right against the remainder of them. But it was intense. not much time to think. And that's how the planning that we'd gone through when I first went there paid off, because we knew everybody who needed to know knew where that gap was and how dangerous it was to have a gap like that. And so all we had to do was fill it with fire. And the guns had already settled on where they would be firing if we were in trouble, and similarly with the mortars, and unbeknown to me, similarly with the 8-inch guns that the Americans had at Ta Nguyen. Very intense. Now it never ever got back to that stage while we were there, but it was continually active. There was one other very, very half-hearted attempt that seemed to peter out almost before it started, and the commander of the task force, he sent tanks up, and they were a real blessing because they could get us out of a lot of trouble. And then to keep them off guard, rather than sit there in our holes, that's when we started pushing our patrols right out, and then going even further, keeping them right away from us and out there looking and patrolling for them. And on one particular occasion, D Company, it ran into perhaps you might call it a small fortified camp about 3,000 metres north of Coral, and he was getting himself into a bit of trouble there until we sent tanks up and APCs, and I sent one of my platoons to go with him to give him a bit of help, and that worked out pretty well. But we spent a lot of our time was spent there after that major attack, was spent in heavy patrols out at least 1,000 metres, and that would give us early warning if we ever ran into anybody, and that just kept them away. And I think it just pretty well petered out after that. The 3rd Battalion, they were off to our west, and they'd had really nothing to do with what we were doing, and then the task force commander decided to shift them to the north of us, but I've forgotten now, perhaps about 7 or 8 kilometres north of us to another fire support base. It didn't have guns, but we had the use of the guns that were in direct support of the 3rd Battalion. We had the guns we employed they came from 104 battery. The guns that the 3rd Battalion were using came from 161 New Zealand battery, and so we had 2 full batteries there based at Coral eventually, and they would be used not only for our protection, but they were also within gun protection also in protection of the guns we had, and that was why they only went about 7 or 8 kilometres, because in general terms, the range of a 105mm gun is only about 10,000 metres. Okay, so they went about 7 or 8, which gave them a good overlap, which meant that not only could our guns and the Kiwi guns put fire onto their wire, but they could fire a further 2,000 or 3,000 metres beyond them, which would be of great assistance in the event that they were attacked. And in fact they were attacked twice after they went up there, not to the extent that happened at Coral, but enough to keep them on their toes anyhow.
The events you were describing in the thick of it happened in the middle of May
Yes.
at Coral.
Yeah.
We will come back to them and we'll continue talking about that, but just to get us back there, perhaps you could lead us up to how this action started and what your orders were, where you were going and how you got up there.
Okay. If I could go back just a little bit before that.
Go back as far as you like.
Okay.
We'll sort it.
Well, we the main body of the 1st Battalion did not arrive at Nui Dat until about the middle of April, and it took us some time to finish the handover with the 7th Battalion, and then become used to where our camp, in fact, was placed within the Nui Dat complex. And so perhaps for the first week we concentrated really on local defence, where my company in particular was based right next to the airfield, and it extended beyond what you might call part of the Nui Dat complex to a point where one of my platoons was, in a sense, isolated from company headquarters and 2 platoon, but it was a very, very heavily defended with engineer stores, and I've forgotten what I was going to say. Hang on.
Talk about the setup
And
of
so,
the camp.
and we were more involved with local defence and keeping people away. It was just a settling in period, and we used to send patrols out each night, and they'd be standing patrols, ready to ambush anybody who was coming in. It was just a matter of keeping people away from the camp. And our first operation, in fact, did not take place until I think we finally left for operations on, I think it was the 22nd of April. No, it wasn't. It was the 24th of April.
Just one point.
Sorry.
For someone who hasn't heard the expression before, what is a standing patrol? What does that involve?
A standing patrol is one that might consist of 2 or 3 guys who are out there maybe 300 metres, 400 metres in front, and they are just sitting there, hiding there, observing. Right? Whereas a normal patrol might do a big, long circular loop around the front and then come back. Mm.
During that period at Nui Dat, what other initiation to the whole Vietnam conflict did you receive in any way?
Myself and my 2 IC and my 3 platoon commanders, we were put in a Land Rover and driven around. There was a good, well, we call it a road complex in the whole of Nui Dat, pointing out where the other 3 of our rifle companies were, where battalion headquarters was, where the stores building was, and then on to where the 3rd Battalion complex was, where the guns were, where the engineers were, and so on. It was just a ride in the park to see where everybody else was and how good the defences were. Mm.
What were your first impressions of the conflict and how well the Australians were set up?
Mm. It was probably better than I expected to see. We had, I mean, it was no Taj Mahal. It was, we were there, arrived there in the dry season, and the wet season had finished, and it was just red. There was nothing you could do about it. It was red dust everywhere. But we had large tents, and they were in under under the cover of rubber trees. I mean, rubber trees had been cut down and moved to make room for the tents, but we was getting a modicum of shelter, not only from the sun but from observation for anybody who might be out there with binoculars and so on, and that helped a good deal. But lots of dust permeated everywhere, and every time a Land Rover drove past, then it would take 5 or 10 minutes before that dust settled again. All the tents we had floorboards. I mean, they were movable partition things, but that kept you up off the ground. And we had wire stretchers and a mattress of some description, a sheet, and mosquito nets. So that was comfort. It was rough, but it was accommodation that we didn't get when we were out in the field at operations, which was rough. And we had each company had its own small canteen building, pretty small, because we couldn't allow everybody in there at any one time. It couldn't allow the whole company in there at any one time, so it was held to about 30 at a time. And we had our own kitchen, had good cooks, and there's one thing that soldiers miss terribly when they're on operations and even in training exercises, and that's bread. You can't get bread. The Americans, in fact, had tin bread that it came in a little tin, and you'd just pierce the top a couple of times and put it over a bit of heat, and the next thing you know, it's gone from dough to bread, and that didn't taste too bad at all. But we had a couple of good cooks, and they used to make bread rolls and fresh bread when they could, and even when we're out on operations, I mean, they'd get bread out to us. And just digressing a little, rations out in the field was always tin rations, except generally lunch on a Sunday, and then in would come a helicopter with loaded down with hot boxes and rice and stew, or curry and stew, or something and stew, but lots of rice and good hot food, good hot food, lots of it, more than you could eat, but we're always hungry. And so rice and stew, rice and curry, nobody minded that, and fresh bread. And if somebody had just come back from R&R somewhere, particularly in Australia, then they'd bring back 40 and 50 hot meat pies as well. Everybody missed a meat pie. Yeah.
I can imagine that was quite appreciated.
Yeah, it was indeed, yeah. So I was talking about, so that was the sort of...
While we're still talking about rations, what were the hard rations like that you took out on operation?
It was a combination. We took out a combination of Australian rations and American rations, and that helped. That wasn't bad. The American rations, it was edible, though we didn't like eating them. You couldn't eat them for too long, and our rations aren't all that brilliant either. But to share two varieties was, that was okay. You could live on it.
What is the difference, briefly?
There's probably not quite so wholesome as ours, but sweeter and different. But I mean, if you like ham and lima beans, the Americans like ham and lima beans. Not too good sometimes.
What was your personal favourite thing to have to eat?
Well, I had a deal with a friend who had a job in Saigon, and every couple of weeks he'd send me down a 10-pound bag of white rice. And I used to share that around the guys. And we had curry as well. And curry and bully beef is not a bad sort of a combination when you get tired of straight bully beef. But if it had curry in it, you'd get anybody to eat it. Just a change of taste. Mm.
Before we get on to talking about operations, and we'll get back to Col in a minute, your relationship to your men, can you briefly explain the relationship of company commander to the men under your command and indeed the chain of command above you in Vietnam?
Yeah, well, the chain of command within the rifle company goes down, and so between me and the rifleman soldier is his platoon commander, young lieutenant, and the platoon sergeant, and then below that again is the corporal and the lance corporal, who really owns that rifle soldier. And it was not my way to castigate a private soldier. But if I thought that he was doing the wrong thing, or being slack, or being idle, or being lazy, or whatever that may have come to my mind, that I'd be speaking heavily to his platoon commander or sergeant, I wouldn't go to the corporal. I'd always go to the platoon commander or sergeant and tell them that I think that Bloggs is damned idle, and I can see rust on his rifle from here. And what are you going to do about it? Leave it to him.
How important was that sergeant's role in running the company or keeping?
The sergeant, very important, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I found this myself. It doesn't matter sort of how experienced the platoon commander is. The sergeant he's the steadying influence, and he's the one who will offer advice without being asked to the platoon commander. The three platoon commanders I had, they were all very good, but all different in the same way. Two of them were national servicemen, the other one was a regular soldier. They were very good. Yeah.
What was the difference, if any, between a national serviceman and a regular soldier under your command?
Didn't know which one was which, and I never bothered asking. I didn't care. All I cared was that he kept his rifle clean. Yeah, but no, I didn't know. I knew what the proportion was. I knew it was about 60 regs to 40 national servicemen, but who was a national serviceman? I didn't bother asking. It was of no value. Didn't matter.
Are there any particular personalities from your company at that time that stand out in your mind today? Tell us about one or two of those.
Gino Terranova. Gino was my medical corporal, and he was a tower of strength, and he was a bit of a swindler too. He used to carry about 3 times the amount of medical gear that anybody else had, and he must have had some friends, but he had access to some medicines that nobody else had access to. I just say it like that. But he was pretty good at calming down pain, and he was always there. I recommended Gino for mention in dispatches, and that was given. He was good. He was always there. Good bloke, Gino. And my batman, Sam Bateman. Sam was always there, and he looked after me and my Company 2IC and my warrant officer, my CSM, Jack Cramp. And because when the, you might say, when the day's work was done and the troops were were settling into our little defended position at 4:30 in the afternoon or whenever it was, then I had jobs to do, Jack had jobs to do, and so did Bill, my Company 2IC. And so by the time we got back to where company headquarters was, Gino would have the water bubbling ready for a cup of tea, and he'd have the rice on, and I mean he'd be cooking for 4 of us, but all our food would be there. So he was pretty damn handy with things like that. And I mean, in the morning, a similar sort of thing was doing. We the 3 of us were out there doing things and seeing how people were after a night, after the night. By the time we got back, he'd have a couple of little billies boiling, one for a cup of tea and one for us to shave in. And I might point out here, water was still pretty precious no matter how many bottles we carried. And one huge mug would provide we'd all dip in this. We used to save weight. We had one razor and one shaving brush between the 5 of us. 5 between the 5 of us, and just dipped into the hot water, and then lathered up and had a shave, and then started off on another new razor blade. So he was vital with things like that. Most important, and he was spare radio operator as well.
How hard then was personal hygiene out in the field?
All difficult. Very difficult. Our latrines were always, if we were in ambush, or I'll start off again. If we knew we were going to go ambushing tonight, then we would not have dinner at night. If a soldier was in ambush and he needed to relieve himself, then he just lay there with his rifle and ready, and evacuated his bowels where he sat or lay. If we were in a defended position, then we had small slit trenches dug within the defended position. It was absolutely forbidden to go outside that defended position, because no matter how careful you are, particularly at night, you can go out between Jack there and Joe there, right? Coming back, lose track of just where you are, and you come back through Tom and Dick over there, and they shoot your head off. So we had these small trenches dug inside, but difficult. Personal hygiene, very, very difficult.
Apart from shaving water, what other concessions were made to keeping yourself clean and orderly out on patrol?
We did our best to have a change of clothes once a week, and that used to come in with the hot lunch on a Sunday. We rarely ever missed a hot lunch on a Sunday. And everybody, we probably had, I don't know, 5 or 6 sets of uniforms, 5 or 6 trousers and 5 or 6 shirts, something of that order, because of this need to change them over all the time. And so before we went out on operations, and we'd never know how long we were going to be, but so we were a bit limited there. But each of our sections had 3 kit bags, and all our clothes were marked, and so each person would put a shirt and a pair of socks and a pair of trousers into that kit bag. And sometimes people would put a carton of cigarettes in there and maybe another cold hot pie, not a hot pie, and maybe I don't know, a lolly or something, but something else would go in there besides. It was only supposed to be for shirts and clothes, but other things would get in there as well. A bit of home comfort anyhow. And so that would come in with the rations at lunchtime on the Sunday, unless we're otherwise involved. And the dirty ones would go back, and then they'd be sent off to a laundry in Berea or one of the paddy fields and washed there, sent back, and then be fairly clean, pretty clean actually, cleaner than dirty ones anyhow after you've been in them for a week, and ready to go back out again. So it was a good system.
It felt almost like kings when you had a clean pair of clothes on.
Oh yeah.
You talked a little bit about the structure of command down from you. How did you receive orders from battalion level, or what was that system like?
Well, our CO was Philip Bennett, and he made Lieutenant General, and he was Chief of the Army, and he was Governor of Tasmania for quite a while, and he was Administrator of the Commonwealth on and off for 3 or 4 occasions. And he was extremely good to work for, and his orders were, he never left us in doubt as to what he wanted to do when he gave us our orders, and they were usually face to face. That wasn't always possible. Frequently they'd come over the radio as well, and he used to speak slowly, and we were quite meticulous. He left us in no choice as to what he expected of us, but he used to speak slowly, and so that gave us the opportunity to write it down, word for word, exactly what he wanted us to do. So that worked well, yeah. So we never had any troubles there. I mean, we did have problems sometimes. He had no problems.
Was there an occasion where you, on the ground, had cause to question the orders coming through from the CO?
No.
Was it thought about?
Thought about, yeah. He was not a man to have anybody query his orders.
How important a role do you think you had in the running of the entire system? I mean, it seems to be quite a pivotal one in a lot of ways. You're in charge of the unit that does the most, or is that a misconception? How responsible are you for what happens to you when you feel as a company commander?
I always thought I was responsible for everything. If I felt that one of my platoon commanders had done the wrong thing, or if I felt that he'd let me down after me giving him instructions, then I'd haul him up and ask him to go through again with me the instructions I'd given him.
How do you deal with that responsibility? Essentially, all these men's lives are on your head. How does one take that?
You become determined that it just doesn't happen again, and you issue orders that cannot possibly be misunderstood.
Let's go back to the 22nd of April. You were sent out into the field. Can you take us? What were your orders at that stage? What happened?
That,
from there on?
actually, I said the 22nd, it was the 24th.
24th.
Yeah. And that came as a bit of a shock to us, in fact, because we'd been waiting and waiting and waiting and saying, when are we going, when are we going, when are we going? And then on the 23rd, the orders came, you're out tomorrow. And that was a bit of a shock because that was the 24th of April and we were all set to, in our minds anyhow, we were all set to enjoy Anzac Day in 36 hours time, but it wasn't to be. So it was the battalion's first operation. We'd been out a little bit before, but only company by company, and not going very far. It was more a familiarisation journey out there over a period of about 6 hours in armoured personnel carriers, just to see what the countryside around the place looked like. But this was our first battalion operation, and we were going out. There's to the west of Nui Dat. There's a small mountain range, two small mountain ranges, in fact, which both of them generally run north-south. And there's a bit of a track. They called it the Old French Road, but it's more of a track that ran between those two little mountain ranges, the Nui Dat, as they used to call them. And I was instructed to take my company by armoured personnel carrier to the base of the nearest mountain range and get dropped off there, and then walk further on and then start searching that right-hand mountain range for any VC who might be there moving from, and I'd be moving from north to south and seeing what we could find. Pardon me.
Take a glass of water.
So we set off, and we were moving through elephant grass, we used to call it, and it would have been 7 or 8 feet tall. And we got there at, let's say, noon, and it was stinking hot. And I've told many people that I fear we were most unsoldiery because, I mean, my scout was out front and he had a compass, and he had 3 or 4 guys immediately behind him hacking away with machetes, trying to push a path through this rotten stuff. And this elephant grass is sort of sawtooth, so it's rubbing against you all the time. It's full of bites and mozzies and other noxious things that buzzing around all over the place. And your shirt is being filled up with pollen falling from all this muck. And before I knew where we were, I'm starting to get reports that Soldier X has gone down with heat exhaustion, and Soldier Y has gone down with heat exhaustion, and so has Soldier Z. And we were still stuck in all this rotten stuff and couldn't get out of it. And so we carried them and then just kept on walking until and got out of it. And we sort of poured water bottle after these guys, but had to get them evacuated. But by then we were out of all this stuff and ready to start climbing, and it just looked, I thought it was too steep to bother about. But in the event, what I decided to do was I had myself of my company headquarters, and I kept 2 platoons with me, and we got onto the major ridge line and started climbing, and I kept the 3rd platoon down below, and they were walking slowly and very carefully up the Old French Road, which was at the base of it. And the plan there, in fact, was that we would walk along towards the top of the ridge line anyhow, and we just knew that from habit the Viet Cong would camp very, very close to water, and that if there was any water in any of the ravines that flowed down from the top of the Nui Dat down to the old French road, then we might well be able to flush them out, and have, it was number 3 platoon down there on the old French road, and so off we set, and the first day nothing much happened. Fired a couple of odd angry shots and nothing happened. The second day we flushed a couple of guys and lost them, and then it got far too steep, so I left one of my platoons right up the top and moved myself and company headquarters down to the base again to join 3 platoon on the old French road, and so we travelled slowly up the road. The platoon I left up the top, they could travel a little bit faster because they weren't being held back by masses of numbers that we were there, and they had some success up there, and so we were pretty pleased with that. And almost at the same time, one of the other companies found a huge abandoned hospital, and another one of the companies found a huge supply dump, and by then we'd all reached, my company anyhow had reached the sort of end of the old French road where the Nui Dat petered out, and we got flown out. That was I think it was a total of 5 days. A lot of effort for not much result, but it was good training. Okay? We learned a lot over that.
How did things change for you after you'd been out on operations for the first time?
I was pleased that we'd been successful. It taught us a few lessons. We appreciated that elephant grass was something that we'd never go back into again if we ever had the choice. I mean, that was really terrible. But it confirmed all the lessons that we'd been teaching each other for the previous few months, and there was nothing terrible we did that we shouldn't have done.
Not long after coming back from that, you were sent out again on the operation that became the Coral.
Yeah.
How did that? What were your orders there, and how did that come into being?
Well, it was fairly simple. We were to move to what was eventually to be called Fire Support Base Wattle. That I was to command the fire support base, while the other 3 rifle companies were out and about around the fire support base, searching for anybody who might be there. And as we learnt subsequently, that was up to the northwest of Nui Dat, not all that far really. And we thought we were going to be there for a week, maybe a bit more. That was the impression I had anyhow. But as it turned out, we'd been there overnight, and the orders came, move again. And so what happened then was that the battalion, less my company, were flown off to the next fire support base, and I've forgotten the name of it. Was it Harrison? Was it Harrison? Sent off to Harrison and started working there, while I ensured as commander of the fire support base at Wattle, I was ensuring the safety of that until right the very last moment. And we had a troop of APCs with us, and so this was quite getting late in the afternoon by the time we were ready to leave, and abandoned the fire support base. And so the APCs, they took us to a US cavalry base called Black Horse, which is north of Nui Dat. And we got in there perhaps 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, getting dark. Yanks knew we were on our way, and they found some hutted accommodation for us, and took us up to their meal house and fed us, and said, "Take care, we'll see you in the morning." Well, after we'd had dinner, I was sort of sitting outside with my 2IC and my CSM, and I was looking around the place, and I hadn't noticed it before, but you know, because we made a point of not sitting on top of the APCs while we're travelling, we were right down inside for a little bit of protection. And there, just to the east of us, was this huge mountain. And it seemed to be only just across the road that we just travelled up. And it could not have been more than 2,000 or 3,000 metres to our east. And then I looked in another direction, and there, not more than 300 or 400 metres away from where we were sitting, was this huge steel pylon with it was a radio beacon, and there's a red light on top going blink, 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 blink. And it was obviously a warning light for helicopters flying at night to stay away from there. And I thought to myself, holy cow, that's the best aiming mark I've ever seen in all my life. And I just looked at that little mountain just a couple of 1,000 metres away, and I thought, now, if anybody's up there with a couple of mortars, then they're going to make a mess of us. So I called in my 3 platoon commanders and told them about that, and I said, well, what are we going to do about it? And they said, well, I'm not sure. And I said, well, neither do I. I said, we can't just scarper and leave the APCs here. I went over to talk to the commander of the APCs, and all his guys, they'd seen it, and they were sleeping inside. So there's no room for us inside. They were sleeping inside their APCs. So I said, okay, well, what we'll do is the Yanks had given us this hutted accommodation. It was rough, but it was a bed. And anyhow, they had all these iron stretchers. I said, get the guys to sleep under the stretchers on the floor. So that's what we did. And at first light, we cleaned our teeth and had a shave, got in the APCs and ran for it. But it didn't quite finish there, because we were still travelling in the general direction of Saigon. And we came to this little place called Trang Bom, which will always stay in my mind, because just as we hit Trang Bom, and we were nose to tail, and Trang Bom was just this little village with shops on either side. I thought, oh, I hated being in there. We were just so enclosed. But there was nothing we could do about it, and the next moment there's buzz, 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 flop, 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 and an American military police helicopter landed on the road, a couple of 100 metres in front of us, and 2 more behind us. And out jumped, maybe a dozen military policemen, US military policemen, armed to the hilt, and called me out. I said, what do you guys want? And they said, we're missing some tools. I said, what are you talking about? I said, somebody's stolen a box of tools. I said, don't be bloody stupid. They said, well, we're going to search your APCs. I said, no, you're not. And the next minute, clickety-click, putting one up the spout. I said, who's your commander? And the sergeant said, I am. I said, I am, sir, thank you. He said, I don't call you Aussie, sir. I said, well, you call me, sir, eh? I said, what's your number? What's your name? So he gave me his name. Sir, thank you. So I said, well, let's go and talk to the APCs. Bloody APC commander had it in his, it was in his APC, big bundle of tools. And I said, you happy now? He said, no, he said, there's something else we want. I said, what's that? He said, these buggers have stolen one of our AK-47s that we knocked off from Charlie last week as well. Hand it over. They handed it over. And then they handed back 3 rifles that they'd stolen from the APCs instead. Yeah.
What were the repercussions of this incident in Trambong for you as a company commander?
There weren't any. It was probably 7 or 8 days before, maybe this, 5 or 6 days before I ever spoke to Colonel Bennett face to face. It wasn't something I was going to talk to him about over the radio anyhow. By then things had cooled down a bit, and I think, and we were getting involved in something that was much more important than that anyhow. But I told him.
What was your response towards the APC people who had?
I spoke heavily to him. Left it at that.
What was, in general, how would you characterise the relationship between American and Australian forces?
Look, I had very, very little to do with them. Very, very little. It didn't start until we were at Black Horse, and I mean they just put themselves out to help us in every way they could, and from there, I had no dealings at all with any American soldiers until we were at Coral. The Americans, you might say, gave the task force, or lent the task force, or sent a battery of 155mm guns to the task force, and they were under command of the task force, and they were on tracks, and they wound up at Coral, and they weren't there for the major battle we had, but they were there when the NVA attacked Balmoral, where the 3rd Battalion was. So their guns, with longer range and a heavier shell, was very, very useful to them. But their guns were only perhaps less than 100 metres behind my command post, and they seemed to come down in dribs and drabs to say hello and how you doing, and what can we do for you, and so on. And when things were quiet, they would come down and say, do you want to send half of your guys out for a decent hot meal? They had their own kitchen, cooking away. And yeah.
How did your soldiers and the Australians in general feel about the better equipped nature of the American army?
We didn't think they were. Well, I mean, their fighting equipment was on a par with ours. Their logistic support is much superior to ours, and of course but they were. I mean, gunners are different, and I guess even our gunners would have had the opportunity to have had, better feeding arrangements than we had, because I mean it takes a Chinook helicopter to carry one in, and if you have the opportunity to put on another, say, 20 cans of water, then you do that. But they travel with their own field kitchen.
Getting back to, you were moving towards Saigon and you arrived at Trambon.
Yeah.
And what were your orders at this stage, and how much did you know about what was happening what would unfold?
No, remained pretty little. Remained pretty little, and I was given instructions then that we were that our battalion headquarters, in fact, was going to which one is it this time, please, Kathy? Anderson.
Anderson sounds good. Well,
Yeah.
If the names are wrong,
Yeah,
people can
no.
correct this later on.
Yeah.
So if we get one
Yeah,
or
yeah.
two incorrect. But
Yeah, finally going to Anderson. Battalion headquarters and the guns were going to Anderson, Fire Support Base Anderson, whereas the rifle companies we were being dispersed and going looking for the NVA or Charlie again, and so the APCs they let us off in a rice paddy field at the base of a ridge line, and I knew that would take us up to where my search was going to start, and we were let off about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I suppose. Climbed and climbed and climbed. It wasn't steep. It was just long, and round about 4 o'clock. Around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I came upon a really good little clearing. It was about 3 or 4 times the size of a baseball court. And I looked at it, and I was getting a bit tired. And I said to my CSM, "This looks like a good helicopter landing point." I mean, the rule of thumb was, if you're going anywhere, then get somewhere near somewhere where a helicopter can come in and land without any difficulty. He said, "Looks good to me too." So I said, "Okay, well let's see where we're going." And I said, "Just move into the thicket there, and we'll set ourselves up." So we have this procedure where we can very, very quickly go into all-round defence, and the lead platoon knows that it has to cover that arc from 12 o'clock around to 4 o'clock, and the next one from 4 to 8, and the next one from 8 to 12, and company headquarters in the middle. I mean, that's just a normal battle procedure where you do things without even thinking about it. And as soon as you're in position there, then each of the 3 platoons would send out clearing patrols, just a couple of guys. They'd go out 50 or 60 yards and go out one way and come back the other way, just to make sure that there's nobody in the immediate vicinity. And anyhow, it just so happened that when one platoon came back, their platoon commander came into me, and he said, "There's a track up there about 40 yards." And he said, Bluey Dalton, who was the corporal who went out, he said he reckons that there's fresh tracks up there. And I said, "Well, let's talk to Blue." And I said, "What do you think, Blue?" He said, "I'm sure they're fresh." He said, the imprints, he said, are sharp. He said, "There's a bit of breeze around right now, and it would have been going on for quite some time. They'd have sort of dulled over a bit." I said, "Sounds good to me." So I said, "Let's get up and go forward." So we moved forward till we were, you might say, virtually on the track, and I very carefully, we got one of the platoons to go onto the far side of the track, and I had another platoon on our side, and the company headquarters in the 3rd platoon's just a little way back. And so we set up this little ambush and said, "There may well be somebody coming tonight or tomorrow morning." And so the night passed, and about 6 o'clock in the morning, I was awake, and I looked around, and I was turned around. I said to my sergeant major, I said, "It's time to send the clearing patrols out." And he said, "It is too." And I sent the order down the radio, send the clearing patrols out. And so help me God, 20 seconds later, off went the claymores, out went the rifles, and off went the M60 machine gun as well. And I thought to myself, God, they've shot out my clearers. And then the word came back, we found one, found two, found three of them. And these roosters were coming up the path, and they were tax collectors. And we know that because their pockets and bags were full of paper money and full of jewellery and watches. And they were, one of them was carrying 3 rifles, and another one had a couple of pistols, and they had a whole bundle of stuff. And there's a message came through battalion headquarters. What's all that firing going up there? I said, I'll tell you when I'll let you know how many we've got. Put the phone down. Anyhow, the upshot of that was that about an hour later, I got a phone call, I got a radio call saying there's a helicopter coming in, wants to bring you back to battalion headquarters. And I said, please don't do that. I said, there's still plenty of guys around here, we just know. And I said, and you bring the helicopter in and you'll tell them where we are. They said, we're sending it in. I said, thanks a million. So back it came, and the brigade commander was waiting for me, Brigadier Hughes. So he said, I hear you've got a successful ambush. I said, it was pretty good. He said, well, that's okay. He said, now I want to talk to you. And I'd been out of communications travelling in the APC, and he gave me a real blast because I hadn't been talking to him, and he claimed that nobody knew where I was, and that I really shouldn't do it anymore. Well, I just knew that he was having me on, I think, that he was angry with me. And I just knew that the APCs were talking back to their base. So they all knew where we were, but nevertheless. And then Colonel Bennett had a go at me because I'd stopped short of where he'd told me to go by about 500 metres. And he didn't want to hear about the helicopter landing part, and he didn't want to hear about the successful ambush anyhow. So I said, yes, sir. I said, I'll go off and I'll promise to be a good boy in future.
What did you really do? How did you take out that frustration? It must have been horribly frustrating to be dressed down for something that you didn't.
I went back and told my CSM and my 2IC. That's what I did. Anyhow, the next morning, 3 more came along. I just knew it. 3 more of them, different guys. And we got on the radio, and Bluey Dalton was sure that a couple had been wounded and got off. And so we radioed in and sent out the tracker dogs. And they said, we can't. One of them, they're too busy, or they've been up all night or something or other. I said, send them. I said, we've got these monkeys. So they didn't send. So we went chasing after them, found one of them, but he was dead already. And so from there, that's when we got called back to Anderson. So we retraced our steps and went down to where the APCs had dropped us off, and they took us off to Anderson. And the whole battalion was gathered there then, and then came the orders. Off to this place called Coral. Charlie's coming out of Saigon, cold, wet, tired and hungry. And we're going into ambush, and they'll be easy meat. And that was, and that's the full circle.
We talked about what happened a bit then.
Oh, I'm sorry, and there's a couple of things I forgot to mention. Our battalion, in fact, was over strength. We had when the 7th Battalion went home, after we'd relieved them, they left behind, I don't know, it might have been 40 soldiers, might have been 50 or 60, who hadn't finished their full gear. So they were handed over to us. And that was the normal sort of thing. But nobody realised that that took us over strength. So, can't have that, can you? So it was decided that they'll all be sent home. I mean, forget that would then make us understrength, but don't worry about that. So it was decided that they would be sent home. And then it was realised that some of our soldiers were, I don't know how they worked it out, but anyhow it was realised that some of our soldiers, even though we'd only been there for less than a month, were due to go off on rest and recreation leave for a week. So I said, well, I'm not sending any of mine off. And they said, yes, you are. 7. So I lost 7, just like that. And they flew into Coral with us, and there must have been 30 sent home, sent back to Australia or back to wherever they went. Non-pen maybe, I don't know. But I mean, you had your choice. You could go home to Australia, or you could go to Singapore, or non-pen, or what's the capital of Thailand?
Bangkok.
Bangkok. Yeah. And if you were lucky, you could get up to Japan, if the Yanks were going there that day. Yeah. So it would have been maybe about 30, and they were all sort of landed. We flew into Coral, finally in the Chinooks, and then they were sent off over there and flown straight back to Nui Dat.
At this stage, you weren't aware of what you were about to face.
No, we were not. No.
When was the first inkling? There was a series of little things that went wrong. I mean, it's well documented, but you've talked about some of them already.
Yeah.
What was the first sense that you got that this was out of the ordinary and it wasn't going to plan?
We were... There were a bundle of things that sort of didn't make sense. We were told that these roosters were coming out of Saigon, fleeing, cold, wet, tired and hungry. Okay? And yet the ambushes, 3 ambushes, were being laid to, let us say, the north, the northwest and the northeast of Coral. Not quite as simple as that, but out that way anyhow. North, generally northwards of Coral, away from where these people are supposed to be coming. Charlie Company was sent to the south to clear the road. I thought that's a bit strange too. And to cap it all, battalion headquarters was to join me in my company location, and I was to protect battalion headquarters while I was in ambush. So we all 4 of us company commanders tried to elicit a little bit more information, but Colonel Bennett pretty fixed. Just get on and do it. So we did. So, that all struck funny, but there was no answer. And then, of course, on that night, that's the night of the 14th, it started with D Company. D Company got into trouble. Charlie bounced into him, and I think they lost 5 or 6 soldiers that night, and a whole bundle wounded when the rocket propelled grenades came in. And so they were off to my west, and B Company was to my east, and they had the NVA bounce into them, but then slipped around to the side, and the NVA came in between me and B Company, and we found a couple of bodies the next morning, but that was it.
Whose bodies were they?
NVA, yeah. And then, of course, they weren't waiting and stopping for an argument with us. They were headed further off the bigger pickings. They were headed back to the fire. They were headed to continue to go through to the fire support base. We weren't really aware of that at the time. And then perhaps about an hour later, all hell let loose. I mean, we weren't, well, you saw the things. I was only, 600 yards, I was only 600 metres away. Eh? And there's no way in the world we could get out of there, stumbling around in the dark to go and help them, poor brutes. And so they really went in there and did over the mortars and the guns. And then the next morning we were all ordered to return to Coral. And D Company, who was, as I said, off to my west, they started off about the same time as I did, and they ran into a group of NVA who were returning from Coral, and so there was a little pitched battle going on between them and D Company, and my company had sort of cleared ourselves out of the scrub, and we were out in a flat bloody paddy. And the next minute we're taking overs from D Company. You know what an over is? Coming at us from our own troops. And that is an over. And so we just dived behind little paddy buns and prayed that it was going to be all over. And the day hadn't started. And here's all these unexpended bullets of D Company coming over our heads. So that's an over. And I was fortunate here because Bob Sutton, who was leading us out, his platoon, he was further ahead than the rest of us, and because we were spread out because of the open country, and he was further ahead from us, and he managed to extricate himself from all this, and he said, "This is where I am," and I said, "Well, don't stop, just get going, and when you get into Coral, track down the operations officer and get him to show you where our company, what area to defend has been allocated to our company, and get ready to guide me in and take me straight to all those, straight to that area." And so Bob said, "I'll do that," and he was there waiting for me. By the time Tony, who commanded D Company, had finished his little effort, that was time for me to get to our feet and start getting back. And so Bob was waiting for me, and he said, "Well, this is where we should be, but B Company have snitched a bit of our dirt, and this is why we've got this big gap." So I had a few strong words with B Company, and then left it at that. It was too late to change things, and that's when I started walking around to everybody else, telling them about the gap and what I wanted them to do for me.
I might just stop there for a second.
Yeah.
Just stop the tape for a second. I might just hand. What was your reaction as a company commander when the first instance you had of losing troops,
I had.
of losing troops, of having losses on your side?
Mm. I was philosophical. I was I felt I'd done everything that was possible. I felt that I couldn't see that there would have been any other way to guard the interests of my soldiers in the way I set up the defensive position. They were they were taken by a combination of an assault that they couldn't withstand, and by the lack of proper defensive stores, and the way in which the North Vietnamese used their weapons, and we were very fortunate that they didn't do more damage to us than they did. I mean, we were stretched out thinly enough as it was, and we were fortunate with the lightness of the casualties we had. Did I feel badly about it? I wrote to all their parents, and the platoon commander, Neil Weeks, he was pretty upset. He was a national serviceman. He was upset, but he got over it. I mean, I'm not sure that I didn't mention it, but well, perhaps I did. Did I mention that I ordered Neil to counterattack them? Yeah.
Just briefly go over that.
Okay.
Tell us.
Neil called me on the radio, and he said these guys have been hit and looks as if they're dead. And he said he said, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And I said, in that case, I said, withdraw the rest of your section. Neil was a platoon commander responsible for 3 sections, and it was just one of those, the one left-hand section pits had been taken out by the NVA, and I said, withdraw the guys from there, and I said, and we'll bring in the mortars onto those pits as best as we can, and that will hopefully assist getting the NVA out of our pits. And it did to a marked degree, and Neil said, he used words like, as I recall it, he said, I think they're moving. I said, then counterattack now, and said, keep them going. And that's when he moved back in again, and we took over the pits. And I think they left a couple of guys behind. But yeah, I think I was philosophical. You can't afford to be upset or emotional, I'm afraid. I didn't think so anyhow. But I did write to their parents.
What about anger? What made you angry during that confrontation?
I was angry on several occasions when I felt that we weren't being looked after as well as we should have been. I was angry with all 3 of my platoon commanders because I didn't think that they were, not together but separately. On separate occasions, I didn't think they were working as hard and as well as they were capable of doing. I was angry with the orders that were coming, some of the orders that were coming down. Upset. But again, you've got to clear that from your mind.
I can't imagine doing that. I know I haven't had the training, and it's obviously a big part of it, but how do you clear that emotional haze from your mind and get back to work when things are not going to plan?
Well, because there's a job in hand, and because what's done is done, and is there any more point in carrying on about it? Because there isn't. That's how I handle it.
It's a common expression used for commanding in battle. There's a fog. It's a fog of war. Can you tell us about what that means to you?
It means that it's difficult to understand what's going on. It means that you're not being told, not being given adequate information. It means that there's misunderstandings, but chiefly I think things aren't going the way you've expected them to go. That's what I think the fog of war is. It's probably all things to all people with different ideas, but that's how. When it doesn't work out the way it's planned to go, then something serious has happened.
When did that fog first start to lift, if you like, for you at Coral? When did things get a bit more in hand?
It started lifting the next day. The next day, when we were more clear with what was going on, when miraculously more defence stores started turning up, when I was able to have the time to get out and talk to all my soldiers, where I had no time at all to do anything at all, when we came back from the ambush position to set up the defensive position, and all I had really had time for there was not to talk to my soldiers, but to talk to the support weapons, who go over to D Company and talk to my mortar man and talk to the guns and so on about that gap. That's what really worried me. And so there was no time to sort of get around and talk to the soldiers and say, you know, if something happens, then we are as ready for it as we possibly can be. So, but the next day, the next morning, the next morning was quite different. When those phantoms, and I say phantoms, we think they were phantoms. We're not. I mean, we're infantry soldiers. We don't know one aircraft from another, but we think they were phantoms. When they came in and dropped the napalm, that, you might say, that saved the day. And after they, I mean, they were so noisy. I mean, they were only 50 or 60 feet above the deck, I'm sure. We saw them. And when it seemed like minutes only later, the sun was up, and the sky was just one huge red haze, and there was fires everywhere. Every little thing that was capable of combustion was smoking away, and there were fires everywhere, and the sky was just one huge red haze, and there was this the stink of explosives and kerosene in the air. It's I can smell it now as I talk about it. And there was this deathly hush. There was not a bird twittering. A deathly hush. It was just so quiet after the noise we'd been going through. And I called in the 3 platoon commanders and had a few words with them and said, I'll be out to see you guys, in the next 10 or 15 minutes. My company sergeant major, he called in the 3 sergeants, had a few words with them. And Gino Terranova, he went off and took out a big bag of medical bits and pieces that he thought might be needed out there. And one of the guys in John Harmer, he was one of the artillery guys with me. He gave me a cup of tea. I'll never forget that. And then things started, you might say, getting back to normal. I did the rounds, went out to see all the troops, and gave them a swig out of a water bottle. And then back to business again.
What was the situation with defensive stores? These you had lacked.
They just weren't there. Why didn't they get there? Well, I don't know. I can only hazard a guess that we just didn't give task force headquarters enough time to get them there. I mean, it would have been 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm sure, before I had returned to Fire Support Base Coral. Now, even if we'd told them even if we'd told the logistic base back at Vung Tau at 8 o'clock that morning, I've got my doubts that they could have had time to get together everything we should have had and loaded up and sent to us. I mean, the only feasible way of getting all that stuff to us would have been by Chinook. You wouldn't put all that stuff on board 3-tonners and drive it up through Indian country. So, I don't think, logistically, I don't think it was possible to get it there in time for that night, even if we'd been aware that there was an NVA regiment just over the hill waiting to come in.
Just stop there and change the tape. You had a further 2 weeks at Coral after that, but it was never quite the same as those first few days.
Well, Col, you've talked a lot about Coral. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your views on the significance of that action.
I think it showed that we were, training-wise and preparedness for war-wise, I think we were more than capable of holding our own. I think we were essentially trained for counter-revolutionary warfare, where we were out there hopefully looking to find the Viet Cong and tracking them down by methods that have been employed for a long, long time, perhaps arguably commencing in Malaya and Borneo, where our troops have been most successful in tracking down, let's call them bandits. What the last thing we were expecting to do was to be fighting main force soldiers, and yet the skills that we had learnt as part of our standard military training, and in this I'm talking about the direction of fire support, just came through as a matter of norm. I mean, when I saw that gap that was going to exist between my company and D company, or Charlie company over on the left, I just knew that I had to do something about it. And I knew that I'd been trained or taught back in the dim dark past that I needed to ensure that Charlie Company's machine guns were going to be able to fire there and not fire on my troops as well. I knew that my mortars had to cover that gap, and I knew that the guns could also cover that gap. Now, I didn't need a little checklist to say, what do I do next? I just knew it. Now, when it comes to withstanding an assault like that we thought was quite massive and quite different to anything that we'd been trained for, then we stood firm, and we'd like to think that we won out. Does that cover it?
And when you say that action was an action like nothing you'd encountered before, how much of that was due to the fact there wasn't a clear front line?
Well, there was no front line. I mean, it was not even an unclear front line. There was no front line. We were. I keep harking. I know I'm harping back on it all the time, but we were expecting to fight counter-revolutionary warfare, and when the 1st Battalion went to Vietnam in 1965, that's what they were doing. Now they were searching and destroying. They were seeking out, using good intelligence. They were seeking out the Viet Cong in their camps away from habitation, and they were searching villages, and not only the people within the village but the village itself, and using all those good tactics, and nothing had ever come up like this before. Nothing similar. Not with our forces. I mean, the American forces had many battles the way we had, and some of them much more significant. Indeed.
Well, you've talked a lot about from a personal point of view, one of the keys to that battle for you was good strategy. But I'm wondering what other survival techniques got you through that?
I think we survived, and we survived well because the soldiers stood firm, and I think it was as simple as that. Yeah. Yeah. They didn't run from it. They just kept on at it. Mm. Is that too simple? Mm. Mm. Well, that's the truth. Yeah.
And of the time that you spent in Vietnam, it sounds like you were mainly out in the field on ops rather than in barracks.
Oh yes, yes indeed. Yeah.
I'm wondering how much that contributed to the stress of the time.
It was stressful because you never knew when you were going to strike the NVA again, or the Viet Cong. Significantly, though, it was the lack of action that put, I think, more stress onto us than continuous action. In that we were, I mean, nothing was the same. Nothing was the same again, and every time we went out on operations, we were expecting to bump into main force troops. I mean, it wasn't that we were being told they were out there. It was that the first time we struck them, we weren't told they were there, and we found them, right? And I felt anyhow, I'll talk about myself, I just felt every time we went out on operations that we were going to strike main force again. Well, we never did. We struck parties of, I think the biggest party I ever struck was about 20, and smaller parties than that, considerable numbers. On any number of occasions, however, we would go for days and days and days without seeing anybody. Without seeing anybody. And when contact was made, it was always a bit of a surprise at long last. You know, the boredom has been lifted again. So there's more stress. There's just as much stress when nothing's happening as when it does happen. And perhaps when something happens, then there's no time for you to be stressful. Is that double Dutch? No? Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering then, in Vietnam, how did you cope with the boredom, and what could you do to relieve it?
Oh. No, there was no boredom. I mean, on operations, you mean, and the quietness and the lack of contact. Well, that wasn't boredom. There was plenty of fear attached to that as well, because I mean, you just never knew when you'd bounce into somebody, and sometimes your nose would tell you that you're in the right spot where somebody should be, particularly in little creek beds and things like that, because nobody can go without water for too long. There was always that feeling that, you know, sooner or later you'd bounce somebody. So there was no boredom, no boredom at all. And actually, there was one period of boredom. It was terrible. The engineers were cutting swathes through the jungle to make it easier for the VC to travel from A to B, and at the same time it would be a sort of a man-made helicopter landing pad. I mean, some of these swathes, they were 20 kilometres long, which meant you could, if you were in a hurry, you could put your tanks or your APCs into one of them and belt down there as fast as possible. If you wanted to land troops in a hurry, then there was plenty of open jungle to land the helicopters and so on. And anyhow, the engineers were there, and they'd have the massive D8 and D10 tractors, bulldozers, with a length of chain or cable that would hold one of Her Majesty's Australian ships firmly anchored, and they just tow that between them, and over would come the trees, and we were there guarding them, and that was boredom. We hated doing that job. I mean, it was noisy, dirty, dusty, couldn't hear a thing. I mean, we'd have been taken any time if anybody had been around the place. But that was boring. I think that lasted for about 10 days. That was awful.
And I'm wondering if you and your men got any time for leave.
We had every now and then we had the opportunity to send 2 or 3 guys at a time to Saigon as part of the embassy guard, and they'd be there for a week. Whether that was a break for them or not, of course, is another matter, because I suppose guarding the embassy would have been a bit stressful on occasions, and they'd be on the qui vive all the time. But that was a break for them, and they most of them went off on 5 or 6 or 7 days leave to, you know, as we've been through before, to Bangkok or Australia, sometimes to Japan if they were lucky. They'd all come back loaded down with frozen meat pies.
And I guess one of the things I'd like to ask you is how I guess aware or what were your sort of feelings on the idea that communism was a real threat to Australia, and that's why you were there in Vietnam?
I don't think I ever thought about it. Is that too simple? No. They put me down on record. I don't think I ever thought about it. I went because I was told to. That was my job.
Well, I understand that your tour lasted for 12 months. And why was it that you were sent back to Australia?
To go to staff college. I was selected to attend staff college, and that's the first rung in higher military education. There were that was at Queenscliff then. It's now shifted here to the ACT, and there were about 60 of us pulled back from probably at least 20 of them had been pulled back from Vietnam at the same time as me. They were all pretty much my age, and some were of my senior, probably in round terms, probably a third were of my age and seniority, another third were a year junior to me, and another third were a year senior to me. So we're all of the same ilk, and we all had different views. We were gunners, and we were armoured corps, and we were infantry, and we were signallers, and we were engineers. We were educationists. We were psychologists. We were a whole mixture of people from different jobs within the army, and we had a number from overseas, an American, a couple of Kiwis, a couple of English, a Malaysian, an Indonesian. I think that's about it. So there was a good mix of cultures, good mix of ideas. Lots of arguments during discussions in the classroom. We were in little syndicates of 10, I guess, and they were a mixture, and we changed the syndicates around every month or every 2 months, something like that, so that you didn't become too used to arguing with that group of people, so you'd wind up with another group. You might have one person that you'd been in the previous group with, and so they'd be mixed around again, and then they'd swap the instructors around and so on. So it was, in its way, in a clerical sense, it was quite interesting. Eh? Lots of views. It was good. Yeah.
Well, when you were pulled out of Vietnam back to Australia, I guess I was wondering if you and your company had an inkling that the war was unwinnable.
that was something that we never invented. Right? I think we saw our task as doing what we were told to do as best as we possibly could. Now, we were looking at life on the micro scale, not the macro scale. And was it unwinnable? Well, it was probably unwinnable the moment the politicians decided that they didn't want to have anything more to do with it. It wasn't through lack of willpower on the part of the armed services.
And I'm just wondering how the morale was when you were pulled out.
Just before I answer that, I'd like, by the time we were getting towards that, I'd finished at Staff College and I was working at Army Headquarters, and life in Canberra was not all that hot then. We were being abused on the buses. We were being abused on the streets. We were being abused in the restaurants, and it got so bad, to my shame, and I guess to his as well, General Daly, who was then the Chief of the General Staff, he instructed us all to stop wearing uniform. And I felt terrible about that, and I bet he did too, but he thought that that's what was necessary to do to stop what was going on. That was awful, and I never felt quite whole when that order came and I had to obey it. I felt terrible about that. And we were still fighting in Vietnam then, and I thought, boy, this is...
And when roughly did that order come? Was that when the big public protests were going on?
Yeah. Yep. It was not good. Not good at all. They made us feel unworthy. They made us feel dirty. They made us feel, bad. Wasn't good.
And I'm wondering if you had thoughts of getting out of the army during that time.
No, not then. No. But there was, no, not then. No. I didn't leave the army for that reason. But it was not a good scene. Not good at all.
Well, a lot has been written about Vietnam, and now it's many years later. Do you feel now that 1 RAR has had the recognition finally that it was due?
Nope. Thank you for asking me that question. We're still working on it. And no, we don't. We'll change that. We're working on it.
Well, before we talk more about that, perhaps just going back to you being in a position of command, I'm wondering now on reflection, was there a time in Vietnam when you felt you were faced with a really difficult decision? No, I never had, and I never have since had any difficulty with any of the decisions I made.
some of them might have been wrong, but I've never admitted to it, never concerned myself that I made the wrong decision. If it was wrong, if you can always look at things after the event and say, boy, I'd do that again another way. But when you're making a decision there and then on the spot, and you've got how much time do you need to make up your mind? 3 seconds sometimes, or less. Then the decision you make is the right one, and you can't change it, no matter what. So it's got to be the right one.
Well, I'm wondering, what do you think might be your strongest memory of that year?
At Coral, just before the Phantoms came in, the NVA had set up a heavy machine gun, and they were not firing at us. They were firing at the aircraft in the sky, and there were 3 American attack helicopters there, and one of the helicopters was flying down the path of the NVA's machine gun, which was firing at it, and their tracer was going skywards, and the US helicopter pilot was flying straight down the path in the face of that green tracer, firing at him. And so there was red tracer going down and there was green tracer going up, and he just went straight down like that, and he didn't pull up until he was probably, everybody saw him. I mean, he had his lights on as well, and he pulled up about 50 feet from the deck. Now he got hit, and the helicopters broke contact then to escort him back to make sure that if he crashed, then they'd be there to pick him up. But that was most memorable. And of course, when dawn came up, and I've already mentioned how the sky looked and not a bird a-twittering and so on, that's something that I'll never ever forget. Mm-hmm.
And what is it about that particular story that you just told me that?
It was just the deadly silence and the smell and the stink of the explosives and so on. It was silent. Right? There was not a leaf was fluttering, and we were, I guess, to put it more bluntly, we were all shocked, not just by what had happened in the previous 4 or 5 hours, but by the dead silence of everything. I mean, there was not a noise, just nothing, just absolute silence after all the noise we'd gone through. Yeah.
It's a very powerful image.
Yeah, nothing.
Well, I'm wondering, when you came back to Australia, how did you adjust?
I was happy to go to Staff College. I was disappointed that I was leaving my soldiers behind, but I was a regular soldier, and so and Staff College was a way of promotion and a better understanding of how the army worked, and a change in sort of career path. I mean, no army keeps 50-year-old majors on, right, to run troops when they've got other skills. That I was disappointed, but I accepted. I mean, I didn't even bother arguing. I mean, that would have been useless and stupid to say, I'm not going, I'll put off going to staff college for another year. I was a regular soldier, so I went. So it was different. Disappointed that I didn't see it, that I left the troops behind. But the guy who took over command of my company was Kim Patterson, good friend of mine, and I knew that he would take over and run things as they should have been run. So there. So I talked myself into that. No, had to. No? Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you personally suffer from any kind of nightmares or stress because of your time in action?
No. 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 Not at all.
And how do you think you managed that?
It wasn't something that I never felt guilty about being there, and I never felt that I always felt that I was doing everything I possibly could to assist my soldiers. And we meet at an annual reunion, and I've never had one of them come up and tell me that I did the wrong thing. So we're good friends these days. We weren't good friends then. I told them what to do. But today we are. So our reunions are quite good, and they're worthwhile. And we've got one next week. You were coming here on the 21st, initially? Yep. I got it changed, because I'll be in Victoria on the 21st at a big reunion. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, a lot has been talked about and written about post-traumatic stress disorder after Vietnam. What are your views on those people suffering from PST?
Yeah. I've met a few of them, and they've got some form of disorder anyhow, and I've got more than every sympathy for them. Some of them are suffering badly, and probably because they had times that tested them that they couldn't handle, and that's not unusual, I guess. I don't know. That's my answer anyhow.
Well, it sounds like you have an empathy for recognising
Oh, I
the
do.
disorder.
Yeah, yeah. We've got guys who come to our reunions, and it's sad to talk to some of them, and so you do your best and sit down and cheer them up. And they're still suffering, some of them, yeah, quite seriously. But why? Well, that's for the medics to come up with an answer. I don't know.
Well, you had...
There's just one thing though, that soldiers who served in Vietnam are not the first on this planet to suffer from sort of problems like that, and they all do. And certainly the civvies in in Berlin and London and Stalingrad would still be shaking in their boots over the bombs and firestorms that landed there. Sure. Sorry.
That's all right. I'm a bit aware that we're running out of time, so we don't have many time for too many more questions. But I'm wondering, perhaps in your career after Vietnam, you spent many years with the intelligence unit. Is there perhaps a moment or a memory from that time that stands out for you?
There is. I'm not an intelligence officer by training, and I'm not a real wordsmith by training, though I think I write a good letter and a good article. And I'm certainly not an academic, and many intelligence officers, or many people I've met within the intelligence organisation, are all three of those that I'm not. But I, for a period of couple of years, I held a position in what was then known as the Joint Services Estimate Staff, and I worked with a Navy fellow and an Air Force fellow, and between the three of us we used to write papers of estimates of capabilities of whatever country the government was interested in, and we used to take it in as we were handed a job and given a task to write, then we would take it in turn to be the coordinator of that paper. And so we all three would write on the different aspects that we wanted covered in the paper, and then as coordinator I would go through what had been written and put together one single paper in the way that I thought that it should read, and we used to turn out one of those papers a month, I suppose, fairly lengthy. And not once did I, as a coordinator, did I produce a final paper that the Navy and Air Force guy didn't agree with. And on every occasion that we sent one off to the director who wanted the papers, he sent back a little letter saying thanks. So that made me feel pretty happy. That was worthwhile. That was a good job. When the military takes away your sword and gives you a biro instead, it's a shock. It's a shock to the system. And but that was a real live job, and it was pretty interesting, more than pretty interesting.
Well, looking back, I'm going to ask you, how would you like 1 RAR to be remembered?
It's remembered. It's all remembered already. The Army recognised our fight at Col by granting a regimental honour, a regimental battle honour for our action there. Some years ago, the government introduced a new system of honours and awards and decorations and so on to take over from the Imperial honours and awards and decorations. And they included in that a couple of unit citations for good work. And despite the fact that that the 3rd Battalion was awarded and allowed to be given a US citation for the good work they did in Korea, and despite the fact that the 8th Battalion was allowed to accept a Vietnamese citation for good work they did in Vietnam, we've still yet to convince the hierarchy that the 1st Battalion is also due for a bit of, you might say, visual recognition. But we're working on it. They're being stubborn. Well, they don't like us. But we'll work on it. We are working on it again.
Well, I'm very aware that we've crammed 30 years of service down into just one day. But perhaps, is there a proudest moment when you look back on your war service?
Is that the proudest moment?
What is your proudest moment, do you think, from your war service?
It's a series. It's at the reunions when guys come up and they say, I haven't bothered coming to reunions for years because I thought they were a whole heap of rubbish, but I'm pleased I've come here today because I just want to say thanks a million for looking after us the way you did. Yep. That happens often enough for me to feel pretty happy. And that's why I would not miss out on one of those reunions.
And I'm wondering if any of your current or future grandchildren might come to you with asking for advice. What kind of message would you like to pass on to them?
I'd say that if they wanted to learn good skills in all sorts of directions, then they couldn't do better than to join one of the armed services.
Well, we're coming to the end of our session today. Is there anything that you would like to say in either summary or closing, or if you feel like there's anything we've left out?
That's a hard one, Kathy. I'd like to say thanks for your patience with me. I don't think there's anything more that needs saying. I don't think. I think we've pretty much been through it. I think I'd like to conclude and say thanks again to both of you. And leave it at that. Thanks for bearing with me. Hope there weren't. I don't want you to count all the ums and ahs. Have you got that turned off yet? I don't want you to count the ums and ahs.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today. It's been very, very enlightening.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good.